Welcome into Training Camp Report presented by Advent Health. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith, back for another day of joint practices in Jacksonville. Today is definitely feeling a little bit better outside. Yesterday was the surface of the sun. Today we got clouds, and I'm hoping this also means that maybe even the intensity's up a little bit more than yesterday. I know that that's something that was talked about with some of the coaches and people in the media afterward of yesterday, that, you know, it was the first day of the camp. It was long, it was hot. There were definitely some good things that happened, but I know they also saw some areas that they wanted to see improved before today. So what were some of your big takeaways from camp yesterday?
I think the heat was a part of it. At least Coach Bowles thought so. And he says they just have to be more mentally and physically prepared for when you start getting more reps and the sun comes out and it's hot. And so they started out flat yesterday. Both Antoine Winfield said it too, and it took them too long, they feel, to really match the intensity level of the Jaguars. And so the end of practice was a little better than the first half. So they want to come out today and be at the top level of intensity right from the beginning and really have a good practice the whole time. And I kind of have a feeling they will, because when you have that practice, you get told by your coach that wasn't acceptable. You're probably motivated to come out and have, do much better in whatever you're getting yelled at for. So I would suspect, and we'll see what happens, I would suspect we'll have a more productive practice today.
I also think that it's interesting with joint practices where sometimes it's not as black and white as it seems about some of the takeaways, especially things like, oh, look at this deep ball that our defense gave up. Well, the quarterback had already been sacked, but you don't see that because the sack doesn't actually happen.
Right.
So I think that there's also some nuance to some of those plays that maybe seemed a little bit worse than they were.
Sometimes the official does blow the whistle
for
a sack, and then they stop the play. We saw Chris Braswell get one yesterday. So, but yeah, sometimes you can't know because they're not going to touch the quarterbacks. They're going to run right past them. So. So you don't see a lot of quarterbacks scrambling out of trouble or anything like that.
Yeah, they just stand there and they're like, oh, can't touch me. So what were some of the things for you, especially maybe injury-wise? What have we learned? And again, there's no formal injury report. We don't get the same kind of information on it now as we would in the regular season, but we can just take a look out of who's practicing, who's not, and then, of course, who's doing some work before practice as well with some of the trainers. So what did you learn at yesterday's practice based on who's available and who's not?
Well, I'll start with Payne Durham. He was the one player who started the practice for the Bucs but didn't finish it. He apparently suffered a knee injury. That's what Coach Bowles said. At the time, Coach Bowles said he didn't have the reports yet on how serious it was. So we haven't heard directly from Coach, but it does seem like he's in good spirits. I think the feeling is that he avoided anything major and he won't be out for very long. So that's good news.
It's great news.
That's not official yet.
Yeah,
Let's wait till Coach says
not official. We're not doctors.
These are basically observations that we're making, right? And then we did see some guys come out early today. The Bucs got here a lot earlier today after running into some bad traffic yesterday. And guys that aren't back in practice yet but have missed some time but came out with trainers and were running, which is kind of the next step. Most notably Jordan Whitehead, who came out here, put his cleats on and ran. He's not practicing now, but he did get in what looked like a pretty good run. There was a couple other guys. Sterling Shepard was in that, Tanner Towla. So some progress being made by those guys. Now, yesterday I said that it looked like Joe Tryon-Shoyinka was back because he was doing the warm-ups and the running, and then he didn't actually practice. He just did running with trainers, but he's in today.
Okay,
at least
great.
through Indies. We just finished the individual drills, and there's actually 4 defenders I saw that have not been practicing that were practicing through Indies, and that was him and Mike Green and the rookie outside linebacker Sean Peterson and linebacker Servassier Dennis.
Okay.
So it's really trending in the right direction, which is good.
Yeah,
so,
that's a big sign.
And I wonder if they made a last-minute change. The two teams, the coaches must have got together and decided this. Instead of, they were originally going to wear shoulder pads and thigh pads today, but they decided to just go in shorts and jersey and helmets. So maybe that's because, hey, we got some banged-up guys that are coming back. Let's have as physical practice as we can, but let's not go overboard.
Right.
Kind of helps to ease those guys back in.
Yeah, that's interesting. So based on that, what are some of the things that you feel like you'll be watching today, knowing what that means about contact, intensity, and therefore what positions it'll be a little easier or harder to take a look at?
We talked about a couple of the matchups yesterday, so going in a different direction. And one I really like that we probably won't see in the game, that's why they're doing it here, is kind of the mental battle between Trevor Lawrence and Antoine Winfield Jr. Antoine Winfield Jr., obviously everybody knows what he did last year and how good of a player he is and all the plays that he makes. And you can't do that without, mentally winning some battles and figuring out what the quarterback is trying to do. I personally think that Trevor Lawrence is an extremely good quarterback. If they can get the pieces right around him this year. And I was talking to a Jags employee who's really excited about what they've done, kind of changing some of their personnel. I think he could really have a big breakout year. So Antoine, trying to battle mentally with their good quarterback, I think is a thing to watch. And then on the other side of it, we had the great running game in the preseason opener, and this is something we can watch here and in the game. Can they keep that going? We saw a couple good plays by Sean Tucker and Bucky Irving, both of whom were really good in the game in Cincinnati. Saw some good work from them out here again. So you'd like to see that some more because they do have some good linebackers. They've got a very good defensive front, and then they have some good linebackers like Foyesade Oluokun. And and I think Devin Lloyd. I'm trying to remember their linebackers' names, but they got some good ones. So a good showing by the running backs, which isn't just the running backs, it's also the offensive line, would be something to keep an eye on, not just today, but in the game.
Yeah, and so speaking of the game, what do we know about, again, who's going to play and not, and how they want to look at that in terms of starters and backups, and therefore some of the things that, especially maybe after we watched week one in the preseason, what do you feel like this team is going to be focusing on, working to see? What are some of the big takeaways that probably we are hoping to get on Saturday?
Yeah, just reading between the lines of I've actually been kind of straightforward with it. What Coach Bowles has said before he even came here, it sounds like if the starters get the amount of work and the quality of work that he's hoping, that they probably won't play again. So we're going to be watching the reserves mostly again, which is good because that's a big part of the preseason games is trying to decide who's your 43rd through 53rd player on your roster, right? And then who do you want to maybe keep around on the practice squad? So it's good for those guys to get a lot of work. I already talked about the running game. I think on defense, there was only one takeaway in the last game. That was a Keenan Isaac interception. And there really weren't a lot of other turnover-worthy plays that we just kind of missed. So you'd like to see the defensive backs getting their hands on the football a little bit more. So that would be one big thing for me. And then, again, if Mike Evans and Chris Godwin don't play, more work for Jalen McMillan. Ryan Miller, who they've really liked during training camp in this offseason. Just maybe that second level of receivers. They did some really nice things in Cincinnati. I'd like to see them continue to progress.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I was talking to Bryce Hall yesterday for another interview, and I said something about, I've heard that Coach Bowles' defense can be a little hard to pick up, and he started laughing.
As we are.
And I just thought that was so great. And it's a good thing to remember about how important these preseason games are for guys especially that are new.
True.
And then whether it's offense picking up Liam Cohen's new playbook, which is new for everybody, which is a lot too, or for him that those mental reps, those actual reps, getting it. Because he said that when he came from the Jets, he's like, we ran one or two calls. That's about it. That we had one or two set calls, and he's like, here we have more, more than that.
He said they had like 4 plays basically with the Jets, and you're right. And so it is tough. And I think that's why last week when asked about the corners and how they're coming along, Coach Bowles said Jamel and Zion, the starters are doing great. Some of the other guys really need to pick it up a little bit. Did you notice that right behind Brian Thomas, their really fast rookie, must have caught a long pass because he loped into the end zone here right behind us.
Yep, I heard some cheering
too. The crowd
too.
was happy, and then he was looking pretty happy.
Yeah,
with
which
the
I didn't.
football,
I bring up the cheers when we're home. I don't bring up the cheers when we're on the road here. But
well, that's another one. We talked about that yesterday. They're like Brian Thomas against our corners. That'll be an interesting battle.
Yeah, and the one last thing I was going to say about what Bryce Hall brought up is he actually called Todd Bowles a genius, and I was like, well, that's saying something. He's talking about it is hard to pick up, but it's not because it's just he's not doing a good job of explaining that he was like, this guy is a genius of what all he dials up, and I thought that was cool to hear from a new player coming in of already calling him that. I was like, it's not a bad sign. All right, that's going to do it for us here at our training camp report presented by Advent Health from Jacksonville. Again, stay tuned for all of our coverage here leading up to the preseason game on Saturday.